being a founder is glamorized a lot. So, if people are thinking of quitting their jobs to build a company, it's not for everyone. It's a very, very tough journey. Actually, my very first job interview was for private equity at BlackRock.
The jobs are still there. They're just more competitive than they used to be.
It's never a bad idea to get to know other founders in your space because that network is so valuable.
Because you were there for a while, like at Barclays. So how long was it before you came to that realization, I guess, right?
To give you some context, I think even as graduates, me and my flatmate were talking about building a business pretty much from day one. So this is like a 7-year process. Okay. The best founders will have the confidence to go up to someone and say,
any views expressed in this podcast are ours and do not represent the views of Cadro or constitute financial advice. Listeners should not rely on any content of this podcast when making investment decisions and should seek professional advice. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Mergers podcast with me, your host, Rory Mason. And with me today, a man so famous that he gets stopped on the streets of London, Ken Thomas.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised by that one as well. We're getting there. We're getting big.
And a warm welcome to Rob Cossins of Scribe AI with us today to talk through his company and journey from banking to AI and tech.
Yeah, great to be here, excited to kind of share the story a little bit.
Rob, we're going to ask a few quickfire questions, sort of a minute or less. Don't have to overthink it, but the first one, probably a bit tricky. Hardest decision you've had to make as a founder?
Hardest decision is always whether to raise or not. It's always tricky. It's never perfect timing. It's always like, because product decisions will just, make themselves almost if you speak to your clients enough. But figuring out where that inflection point is to raise, I've always really difficult, I think. What's
your one big fear with all the tech change when it comes to Scribe?
Big fear? I suppose if you miss the opportunity, timing, you want to nail timing, you want to nail your go-to-market at the right time. I suppose that's probably the fear. That we don't have quite the scale that we need to make the most of the opportunity.
Advice for the 20 to 25s coming up in this sort of era of change.
Don't worry too much about it. I think a lot of the skills are, learn how to kind of be a curious individual. Like these human things are really, really important. I think they'll be here for the next 100 years at least. I think also entrepreneurship, being a founder is glamorized a lot. So, if people are thinking of quitting their jobs to build a company, just test it a little bit. Speak to other founders, speak to people, see what they think, because it's not for everyone. It's a very, very tough journey. And, you've got to speak to people and figure out whether it's right for you, your skill set, your career.
Advice to incumbents that are slow to change.
Use Scribe. That's it.
Hi, sorry to interrupt, but the Mergers podcast has been sponsored by Cadro, an FCA-regulated investment management firm. Cadro combines technology with traditional portfolio management to provide bespoke investment management services to high net worth clients. To learn more, head to www.cadro.com. Tell us about your upbringing, how you got into banking, and then why, once you got a really good corporate job at Barclays, why did you decide to be a founder?
Great. Yeah, really good question. There's a lot in there. Maybe like pretty standard path that I'm sure lots of people follow is when you're young, you look at all those career paths that are open to you, you think, yeah, actually that looks like the place to be. I want to make money. And you do what everybody else is doing and you sort of go and study something kind of relevant, and then you go through those kind of grad scheme internship applications. So, very, very typical. I think I knew pretty early on, I think it was when I was 16, 17, there were a lot of stories about like bankers' bonuses. And I remember that
specifically
being front of mind. Yeah, I just remember that being front of mind. I was thinking, well, okay, I can see why people are annoyed about this, but that feels like a good path to go down. So I went off to study economics and then applied to a load of internships, and I was pretty unsuccessful with internships. My very first job interview was for private equity at BlackRock, and you can imagine as the very first job interview you have, just how difficult that's going to be. Yeah. I performed horrendously, didn't get the job, obviously, and ended up interviewing for lots of banks, and it was a real learning kind of experience. These places are tough. They're very competitive, full of smart people. So I applied to something like, it was more than 100 internships, I think.
Jeez.
Something like that. And I don't think that's too uncommon. I think lots of people do the same. I didn't get into a bank, although I was desperate to. I ended up working at British Telecoms at BT. I did a finance internship there, which was great for a number of other reasons. And then started applying to graduate schemes, and ended up at Barclays. I think I applied to maybe 50 or 60 grad schemes after that.
When you're at BT, saw on your LinkedIn, that was a bit of after saying how bad you were at internships, sounds like you're actually pretty good when you got it.
It was a funny organization to work for. There's a real mix of people. It's kind of transitioning away from being state to being public. Obviously, that legacy is still kind of there. But they had some really smart people, some innovation going on. I think I was tasked with finding some cost savings, which in a company that big is there's a lot of stuff to be done, I think.
Yeah. I think what's interesting, you mentioned how many industries you applied for, how many grad schemes you applied for, and I think it's probably a bit topical in the kind of job market we're in now. When were you applying for all these? And then on top of that, what was that like, kind of going through that drudgery, I guess? So
it took me a while to find all the other people at university who were also applying. And when I first started, I was kind of on my own a little bit. And eventually I sort of found some good friends that were going through the same thing. And that became easier. Once we were discussing what to write, how to write CVs, all of this kind of stuff, it became a bit easier. But it was kind of alongside studies, much like kind of everybody else.
This would have been, pre-chat GPT when you actually had to. I remember that you had to do everything manually, line by line, the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and you had to, you couldn't really copy and paste the same cover letter. So there was a lot of kind of stuff going on. You had to turn up to the networking events. You had to turn up to the drinks. And so for the Barclays one, I did actually go along to one of their recruitment events. They came to our university, and some of the team were there. And so those kind of things were so helpful. And so I think like finding that community was actually, a bit of a game changer, I would say. Finding those other people who are applying for those kind of jobs. Often like grads will ask me like for advice. Like, what would you say to someone at university who really wants to work in a bank? And you might remember those like careers fairs.
Yeah.
And if you're a student, these places are the most awkward things. You don't know what to do. You sort of walk up to the stand and awkwardly shake someone's hand and take a brochure. And now I've been on the other side, I realized that these are an amazing opportunity to be curious, ask about the company, like genuinely figure out what it looks like to be like a grad in those organizations and make a connection.
Yeah, and with that, like outside of the awkwardness, of course, I think, where do you think in those opportunities, especially so early on, because we don't really have those anymore at our age, the mistakes that are commonly made in those kind of environments?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily knowing what kind of questions to ask, I suppose, is probably the biggest one. I think people they have this idea like, I want a job, and they don't really think much deeper, because at a certain level, I think they're right to think like that, because that is their goal number one. But actually being just that little bit more curious about what those particular jobs mean, what they're actually going to be doing, goes a long way towards, people putting you to the top of a list to get an interview. So I'd say, like, at least for a grad starting out, that's really how to kind of make the most of it, and just ask around, be curious, ask other people.
The bar isn't always that high. Like I remember when I was at Barclays, we'd have people come in, and one guy I remember cracked me up because he was like, was already in on this like open day thing, and I was like, so what type of like banking do you want to go into? And he's like, what? And I was like, well, like retail, corporate, investment, private. And he was like, investing banking. And I was like, dude, like, come on. It's like, so, like, when you're at these fairs, I think sort of going with an understanding of like, hey, I want to be an investment banker. And specifically, I have like an interest, I think, in M&A or like in equity research.
And the reality is, often people don't know. Ultimately, you're still a kid at this point, often. And so... And that's where these like university societies really help, because they teach you like, what are you actually going to be doing if you're a trader, if you're in sales, if you're in IBD, these kind of things. So I think that's always worth investing time in. And one thing that a lot of people, well, I say a lot, a few people did ping me on LinkedIn was, hey, I'd love some advice. What's it like? Can you help me? And people are more than willing to help. So if you're a student, just reaching out to these people and saying, hey, I'm at the university you went to, would love to chat about your experience and give me a steer. And so I spoke to someone, I think last year, and kind of offered them my time. And, I think he said he'd spoken to maybe 10, 15 people in the industry. And I was like, wow, like that's initiative.
Doing
like
the
that's
work.
how to do it. Yeah, he was doing the work. I'm sure I haven't followed his career trajectory, but I imagine, he's done all right. Be surprised if he hasn't.
Yeah, bit of preparation and bit of hard work, and the jobs are still there. They're just more competitive than they used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, cohorts do change over time. I mean, I read that BNP Paribas the other day were reducing their intake and delaying it, something like this. That's one example. So it's always going to be very, very competitive. But, a few small things, I think you can really get ahead. It's quite straightforward to do.
Hey there, looking to level up your lifestyle between big meetings and bold moves? Loom Club's your place for that. Located in Islington and Hackney, it's a great social club with a lot of events, big wellness scene. They've hosted everyone from TikTok to Deloitte. The reviews are great. Highly recommend you coming through. And they're also one of the sponsors of this today's episode. Try Loom for yourself for a 2-week experience for the price of a cinema ticket. Quote the mergers on the website for insider welcome. You can check them out at loom.club, or you can catch them at loom.club on Instagram.
So when you're at Barclays, sort of did the fairly traditional, analyst, associate VP, climbed the ladder, obviously performing well. What was that journey like?
Big banks, I think, are great because you're young, you come in at the start of your career surrounded by really bright people, and they might come from all over the world to come to London and work. And so that was like the main thing I really, really enjoyed, and worked with some very, very smart people. So I was on a graduate scheme, so I jumped around a little bit. I did 4 years in London, and then I ended up working in Frankfurt in Germany for 3 years. So for me, it was never about getting promoted. I never thought that way. I just thought I'm going to soak up as much as I can, and I wanted to kind of experience as much as possible. So that was kind of my approach to it. And I got to work on a lot of interesting stuff. I suppose thinking about the very earliest, I think some of the mistakes I saw get made by people at the beginning of their career was that they would be very, very impatient on lots of different things, whether that's getting promoted, getting more pay, all of these kind of things. And so they'd make really short-term decisions like moving to another bank after a year for a 10% pay rise. And I think in some cases, maybe they found their route, but like over, the last, I suppose, 10, 15 years watching career trajectories of friends of mine, I would say usually a bit of, being able to go through the ups and downs of a natural career path where sometimes you might feel a bit more stagnant, other times you're growing and you're working on some cool stuff. Some of this is going to be market dependent, it might be your team, all of this kind of stuff. And I think, a little bit of patience goes a really long way towards actually making those steps. And, I've got lots of friends now who are managing director who are doing really, really well. And, well over half of them, they're probably because they've stayed in one place for at least a good enough amount of time to build those internal networks, to figure out the politics of the organization. And I think that's kind of how to, or at least that seems to work.
That's a good point, because
you might disagree. There's not one path, right, for everyone.
Yeah, but there's this I go back to the 1960s, and they had this idea of the organizational man, right, where people they came to a place and they were there for their career. You could have a career, you could be a lifer, but actually meant something back then, right? Yeah. And some of this conversations, maybe the employer could be a bit more proactive on things, but there's also the aspect there's this idea of loyalty to the organization and their employees is a bit changed as well. Have you seen that kind of tie in?
So I've come full circle on this. So I think there are two things going on here. Number one is that during that period, these organizations were growing. Now, it's really easy to build your career inside companies that are growing. That's why people love moving to big tech or whatever, because they can grow their careers quite easily. Yeah. Banking headcounts generally are in decline. And so it's naturally going to be a little bit harder to figure out your path if that job doesn't, if there are no jobs to kind of grow into. However, I would say that I wouldn't say it's necessarily loyalty. I think it's, there's a lot to be said.
Both ways. Loyalty is also both ways between the employer and employee and vice versa, right?
That's very true. I suppose what I saw work was, the people that figured out that like the organization would drop them in a second. And if you can kind of get comfortable with that, you can build really good careers inside organizations. And I think it's this kind of idea of moving around a lot has worked in some cases, but I think, you know, for the real outlier success, at least inside big corporates, I'm just talking about big companies. I've seen it work really, really well. And so that narrative, it's not so clean, I think.
I think I know what you're saying, which is like, if you're going to rise from analyst to MD, you know, like 5 promotions or 4 promotions, whatever it is, you're never going to get a clean path where 1 year you might be like, all right, I'm ready for VP. And like, you just get a chat from the MD and they're like, there's no room this year. Like whatever's bad year or whatever's happened, a bit of a restructure, like you're never going to get that perfect route. And if you always go, well, I'll just lateral, you probably do end up earning more money at that position, but it takes, they say, time to rebuild networks. Maybe you have a really good mentor, like maybe that MD is like gunning for you, but his hands are tied or whatever. So like, yeah, I think having some patience pays off in the long run.
I think it's just about sort of riding out some of those bumps. And I've seen, you know, where like, I wouldn't say, where was I going with this? I think it does take time to rebuild all of those networks, and that can unlock things. That can make you really effective in your job. You're going to have times where it's not working. But you obviously need your sponsors inside the organization. You need all the politics that goes around with it. And sometimes you're just going to have a bad boss and you need to leave that. And that's ultimately the reason people leave, is because they have bad bosses, you know. So
naturally, given that you've just sort of demonstrated the benefits of being a lifer, why did you say fuck it?
I didn't quite have myself down as a shill for being a lifer, but here I am. It's a good question. So I've thought about this a ton, because it's really, you know, I've made a handful of key life decisions. This is obviously one of them, so I think about it deeply. So when I left banking, I was actually I was enjoying it more than at any point I had. Because I think once you reach a certain point, people trust you, they come to you, you're respected. And that's actually quite a nice slot to be in, I think. You know, you're working on deals where everyone's dependent on you, and that was quite rewarding. So it's less about that and more thinking about, I thought about kind of a couple of things. The first one was like my learning curve. Like, I think it's just, people should focus on that generally in their careers, is I want to learn as much as possible, because I like that. I like learning, I like doing stuff. I don't want to coast. So that was one. And secondly, I thought I could automate my job. I was looking at what I was doing day to day and thinking, you know, we had an offshore team in India that would support us with things. And I was thinking like, you know, this kind of stuff hasn't really changed in the last 10 years. It's like, I am certain that this can be automated. That's sort of, and so I left. And now building Scribe.
Because you were there for a while, like at Barclays. So how long was it before you came to that realization, I guess, right?
To give you some context, I think even as graduates, me and my flatmate were talking about building a business pretty much from day one. So this is like a 7-year process. Okay. But I suppose, you know, we were attending all of these foundery tech events and things like this. I spoke to quite a few people internally about what I was thinking, probably about a year before I actually left, something like that. I probably could have maybe quit a little bit sooner, but I think I enjoyed that psychological safety net of like, I've got a skill, I made it to a decent level within a bank, you know, there's something I can fall back on, not that I would now, but yeah.
And what, out of interest, when you were leaving, how much of that was like the carrot of like, I want to build something, this could be great, being almost like the stick of like, if I don't jump, like someone's going to do this, so I'm gone anyway.
I would say the biggest motivator is actually, and I think this is true for a lot of founders, it's like, am I going to regret this? And to me, that answer was like, I'm going to regret not doing it more than I am going to regret it. Because at least if it didn't work, I'd be able to say, oh, well, I give it a go. You know, I swung the bat, you know, I gave it a go. That was probably the main motivator. It was less about, well, it was also, you know, technology is coming for a lot of these roles. And I was like, well, I want to be driving that. I want to be part of that. I want to do something. And in the long run, I'm not that good at being told what to do. So I think that's another thing where I was like, yeah, I've probably reached the peak of how I can work these organizations to my benefit. I need to own more of my trajectory.
Yeah. And so, again, after giving the benefits of that, you decided to found a company in 2020. No?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, terrible idea, obviously.
It's the scariest time to...
So maybe if I wind back a little bit on that. So I actually took a year out of work first. So I went traveling with my other half, which was brilliant. So we did 10 months. That was just good fun to do. You know, it was a nice, like, I've never loved the idea of waiting until I'm retired to do something fun. So why not, you know, cash in a little bit of that now. Came back to London and spent about 6 months, 2019, trying to find a co-founder. So like a technical person who could help me build what I wanted to bring into the world. And then, joined an accelerator called Antler, and that's where I found my co-founder. So Emmanuel is my co-founder, CTO, deeply technical guy. And we were on this acceleration for 2 weeks, and then I think it was a pandemic after that, which came with pros and cons.
What was upside, I guess, just could lock in, to quote Gen Z, or...
You'd be surprised how many people can take a call if they're working from home and they work for a bank or something like that. They're not going to do, they wouldn't, if you're super early stage, it's really hard to get people to talk to you. But if they're working remotely, they'll do it. So we had a ton of really good client like discovery calls during that time. But on the flip side, you couldn't meet in person. So it was really hard to build proper connections with people. That was hard.
I guess with that, like, how did you, as you spent a lot of 7 years, like you said, talking about like thinking about starting a company. How did you come across the idea that you actually wanted to go out on? Obviously, you were at Antler. I know there's a lot of ideation that goes in those cohorts as well, but...
Yeah, I approached it very much in a way of, I felt like I wanted to build in an area that I had a deep understanding for. And that was, you know, my sort of what I'd been doing. I suppose I didn't have I like the industry. Like, I think there's a lot of really like smart people, and I enjoy that world a lot. So I didn't really want to leave it too much. And I think that drove some of the decision making. But I mean, since then we've, you know, ended up selling to all sorts of organizations, not just, you know, lenders and banks, lenders and asset managers and people like that, but more widely.
Can you also touch on actually like what exactly it is that Scribe does?
Yeah, of course. So Scribe, so we're a private markets data platform. So we effectively automate the analysis of private companies. So we work with asset managers to help them understand like portfolio companies or the funds they invest in. And we also sell data on angel investors to founders and funds. That's what we do. So we work with over 600 organizations now.
And is that, out of interest, if they're private companies, where do you get the data from?
Yeah, so we have a kind of split model. So one is we scrape information from Companies House. So it's like, you know, publicly available data, but of private companies. And then our other model is helping those organizations understand. So we have our own models that will extract information from stuff that our clients send us. So it's that we effectively imagine, you know, like a pitch book, but for each organization. That's what we do.
Okay, that makes sense. So you still, they'd still be doing that PE style due diligence where they request the non-publicly available information.
Yeah, it can be a mix. There are different use cases, but like, so for example, for the funds, we've got lots of data on LPs because we've extracted it from horrible documents on Companies House. So they use that kind of data.
Nice.
And this is being done with AI.
Right. Yeah, all sorts of tech, but yeah.
And I guess, like, you know, when it comes to the idea of using AI, obviously this is a bit before we kind of had that. I want to say it is very like talked about now, but you know, what does the average person know about AI? But in terms of our space, it's very well known. But when you started using it, it was a bit even before that time, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to make the distinction because AI as a technology or machine learning, deep learning, whatever you want to kind of label bits of it as, it's been around for a really long time. And you've had lots of sort of waves of sort of mini financial bubbles that some people have made money in, some people have lost money. Like even over the last 5 years, I think it's been like creator economy, crypto, blockchain. Now it's AI, and that feels like a bubble that might pop, or at least valuations will adjust in my mind. However, the underlying technology is, you know, it's absolutely here to stay. Like regardless of like, we don't really talk about AI when we speak to our clients because they just care about what problems we're solving for them. But when this was one of the interesting, this is where it really helps to find a co-founder, because when we sat down and we first started, I explained what my job was, and it blew my mind what was possible. This is in 2020. This is pre ChatGPT, and he showed me a model, and it was basically if you work in finance, you'd be used to like annual reports. And at the time, he asked a question of this, like it was all in code, and it said like, what was, I don't know, the debtors in 2018 or whatever, and you typed it and it pulled out. Now that seems easy now. At the time, I was like, I've just never seen anything like this. It was at the time, it was like a Finbert model, very early. Didn't work perfectly, was nowhere near ready for production. But we started playing around with some of this tech. So we've been working on this stuff for a while, and I think one thing that these booms help with is, I wouldn't say necessarily customer adoption, but certainly customer curiosity. Doors that were closed to us a few years ago now are wide open. We're getting referrals all over the place because people are more curious about technology as an enabler, and they a lot of them recognize that their existing setup of tech teams in banks, for example, might be in India or Philippines, and then your relationship teams are in London or New York. And like, if you were starting a bank from scratch from day one, there's no way you'd set it up like that. You'd have a tech person in every single team, automating their day-to-day, helping them with data, helping them with all this stuff. You'd redesign the whole thing. And so that's the arbiter. And that's why we have a business, is because of these legacy systems. They're not built to make the most of some of these like technologies. Right. Sorry, I went a bit off.
I think it makes a very, very good point, right? And I guess now that you've seen, this is one thing about education, appetite, and awareness, right? And I think there's all those things that kind of come around the same time after you've already been set up, which is quite interesting. And you've had the case studies already. You've shown that what could be done. I guess with these, like, where do you find that you fit in a lot of these institutional companies, like as Scribe? How do you fit into that stack that they're developing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant thing that you're iterating on, because when we first started putting stuff in front of people, it was too alien. We were way too early on some of the stuff we were doing. But I think what we're really focused on is, like, particularly if you're selling to these big enterprises, how can we make it as easy as possible for them to get the value from what we do? So, for example, we work with a couple of very large asset managers, and they don't see our technology at all. They forward it to an inbox, and then they get everything structured for them, and we send it back. But it's within their existing workflow, so they don't change anything. Obviously, there's a huge amount of tech our end going on, but they don't see it. And I think that's where you're a software investor. I think software is becoming increasingly invisible, and I think every person building software or technology, I don't know necessarily how you'd bucket it, should be thinking about how they solve those problems for their clients invisibly. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be that, like, I spoke about like a pitch book for your private companies, but imagine you're on the way to a client meeting, you pull out your phone, you've got like a digest of absolutely everything that this client's done over the last 12 months, and it's just there. That all of that work is manual at the moment, but imagine if it was fully automated. That's kind of where it goes. You want this stuff to be invisible to the extent possible. That's what we're trying to do with the product. But
someone who hasn't founded a software company, what was the hardest part? The fundraising and the getting the momentum, the building of the product and solving the issue, or getting legacy institutions to adopt a like frontier tech product?
Yeah, off the list of hard things.
D, all of the above.
The long list of very hard things. It's a good question. I've never sat down and ranked all of the mistakes or things that we've made. I think what's hard actually is, this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think the hardest thing is actually learning how to be a founder. That's the hardest bit, is like going out from a very corporate world. And by the way, I come across a ton of bankers every day, and most of us make for terrible founders. And the reason is that you've learned a set of skills that aren't really very relevant for building a company. And I don't say that lightly, but these are things like being really protective over your brand, like making sure you don't say anything online. Like if anyone coming out of large corporate will know this, is you sort of have to deprogram yourself. You have to become less corporate, because that means you've got to get used to cold messaging. You've got to be used to receiving no's. You've got to learn that your product has to not be perfect. All of this kind of stuff is very hard. So I think the hardest thing for me was early on learning how to become a founder. And by that, I mean
de-institutionalizing yourself
a little bit, but also not thinking that the product has to be perfect before you put it in front of people. Or even, the best founders will mock something up and it will look great, but it's just a Figma, or it's just like, I don't know, maybe it's a cursor or something like that. It doesn't do anything. But the best founders will have the confidence to go up to someone and say, here's what we're thinking of building. Would you buy it? Do you want to co-build? Like, get someone to pay for something right up front.
Yep.
We kind of did that, but I think we could have done a ton more of that very early on.
That's actually quite interesting. So I was speaking to a guy called Wout, who's a VC in Netherlands, friend of the pod. But he said the same, which is like, or he's founded an AI company. I was like, well, how do you go about doing it? He's like, he's awesome, very like brash and he's hilarious. He's like, well, I think first I get them to give me the money, then I build the product. And I was like, who's giving you money if you don't have a product? And he's like, no, I just say, give me the money and then I give you the product. It's like, it's so good. But I mean, if you have the confidence, it's very charismatic. You have that confidence. It's obviously kind of working, right? And then you can just constantly leverage.
I think if you're a first-time founder, what you'll do is you'll think of reasons not to do the hard thing. Now, the hard thing is to say, we'll build it and you pay us for it. But as a founder, you'd be like, well, actually, you know what? It's easier to get his friendly feedback and build away and then come back to them. Oh, we've done this. Would you, what do you think? Softly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mistake most first-time founders make.
And then you end up just annoying people.
Yeah, because you're worried about burning that bridge. Like, I think within 2 weeks of us building, because we had an amazing advisor, really, really nice guy. He got us straight into board level of a massive global bank. I was like, I mean, obviously that went nowhere.
Yeah.
Like way too early. But if I had shot my, if I had gone, we're thinking of building this, would you pay for it? You never know. They might have said, yeah, sure. And if I asked 10 of them, maybe 2 of them say yes. Suddenly you've got a business. Yeah. And I think founders underestimate. You can just keep going back to people. Even in these big banks, you can just keep. They forget they've got other stuff to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned like kind of selling before. Right? I think I guess from the investor side, this is all traction, right? People want to say like we're doing this XYZ, and like sometimes you'll probably get a design partnership without any like revenue to come with it, but all these things kind of tie together, because if you're already selling these folks that are going to pay for this or work with you on it, then you can probably sell the people. You sell employees that you want to hire. You sell investors on it to get it behind it, and all these things kind of tie together. And you can kind of get a vibe of that when you're speaking to someone.
Yeah, and I think another classic mistake, which I'm sure you've seen many, many times, is founders often think, I can't do that until I've got that. And so they see it as like, I can't build a product until I fundraise, and I can't win clients until I have a product. It's completely the wrong way to think about things. No. I think the best founders are like chaotically pushing all of those things forward all at once, all of the time. Like whether that's sales, product, marketing, everything is being nudged forward. And you don't necessarily, I think anyway, want one to be way ahead of the other. You sort of want everything to be moving in tandem. But I see that more often than not around founders sort of putting barriers up for themselves, when actually they sort of the best ones will be walking through walls to get everything done.
And you had mentioned about being an antler, right? Like like deinstitutionalize yourself, changing your mindset. How did you find being an accelerator helping you become like, or getting the founder mindset, so to speak?
Also, do you want to quickly explain what an accelerator actually does and like why it's potentially good to be in one?
Well, you've been through one, so
No, both of you.
Yeah, an accelerator is, I mean, they vary a lot. You can get corporate accelerators, investments. So Antler itself is a VC. So they bring people together and they sort of do a bit of founder matchmaking and then invest in the businesses that they like. It's a super short, maybe 10, 11 week process, something like this. So that particular accelerator was perfect for me because it was a real talent thing. You know, they had this huge pool of people that they narrowed down to 60, 70 people. And I was able to find my co-founder. We've subsequently obviously raised clients, growing, you know, all of this kind of stuff. So it can be really, really helpful. I think being in that environment is just to be around people, broaden your network. But I think the wrong accelerators can also be a distraction. So I think founders just have to be a little bit careful about where they spend their time. And I think the only foolproof advice, if I can call it this, is it's never a bad idea to get to know other founders in your space, depending on who you're selling to, what you're building, because that network is so valuable. Even if it's just like an hour coffee, you bring 6 people together, or like go for a drink or something like that. Yeah. So valuable. Well, I've done that a lot, and now occasionally bring groups of founders together, and you always learn something. That's usually worth doing.
It's a lot more collegiate than perhaps a corporate where you're sort of gunning for the same promotion. Is everyone a bit more friendly, or is there still a like healthy competitive tension?
Yeah, the difference I would say in a corporate, you have one job, and that is to make your boss's job easier. In my mind, anyway. Obviously that's simplifying a lot, but I would say, if you want to get ahead, that's your sort of, you turn up, you make their life easier, and obviously up people around you, but broadly that's your goal, I think. Whereas as a founder, there's a ton that you don't know, and so you've got to ask people. And guess what? You're not paying people on retainer to answer your questions. You're calling up a friend, like, hey, how did you do this? And then I'll say, well, I used them or whatever. So you've got to, I think, it's kind of table stakes really to know other founders. I'm always surprised when founders say, I don't know any other founders. I'm like, wow, I mean, to go on that journey alone is it's hard enough, but to do that alone.
Yeah, which kind of comes to the networking part, which has been networking part, which has been a very consistent theme in all of the people we've spoken to.
Yeah.
Even those that are like getting into corporate or getting into finance, it's who you know and how'd you get that network. And, it gets speaking more to what you just said about like going that alone, but without like networking. Like I think it's also detrimental to the business itself as opposed to the own mental health of the founder.
Yes.
So like how have you kind of navigated that and thought about it?
Absolutely. It's key. And I think it's something that's not, we find it awkward in the UK in particular compared to, I think the US is so good at this. They just know how to open, they know how to help people out. They know how to introduce, I'm sure if you ask people who've never made an introduction, and this is really common, it's like, I've never made an introduction. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, wow. Like if we taught everyone just how to like do a double opt-in intro, you would unlock so much in the economy, like to take a grand theme, like, and that's crazy to me. But
which is then brings the question, what's worse, the person that can't intro or the person that doesn't do the double opt-in intro?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to another episode. We've got another one coming next week. Again, huge thanks to Rob, and please like and subscribe below.